He walked in and froze. Right there, in his own living room. His wife had his mother on the floor, beating her with a rage he'd never seen before. This wasn't just anger. This was hatred, raw and unfiltered. The same woman who smiled at his mother during family dinners was now the monster standing over her, fists clenched, eyes burning. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. She didn't know he was watching. And in that instant, the woman he thought he knew, the woman he vowed to protect, was a stranger. Now he's not just a husband, he's a son with a choice. Defend his wife or defend his mother. Either way, the family he thought he had is gone forever. At Lagos Bank office, Chinedu Okoro's leather shoes clicked against the marble floors, each step echoing the rhythm of a man who believed he had conquered life itself. Outside his corner window, construction cranes danced against the skyline like metal prayers reaching toward heaven, while below, street vendors hawked their wares beneath the same ancient baobab tree that had watched over this land for centuries. His gold wedding ring caught the morning light as he signed another loan approval, the weight of success heavy on his shoulders like his father's blessing. But success, as the old women whisper in market corners, can make a man deaf to the screams echoing from his own compound. The photograph on his mahogany desk showed a Dieze at their wedding, her smile radiant as morning sunlight, her galley wrapped with the precision of a master craftswoman, her eyes holding promises that made his chest swell with pride even now, 5 years later. She stood beside him in that frozen moment, every inch the perfect Igbo wife his mother had prayed for, her beauty stopping conversations at church socials and making other husbands glance with barely concealed envy. The gold jewelry adorning her neck had cost him 3 months' salary. But what price could a man put on perfection? Yet even in that treasured photograph, something lurked behind those stunning eyes, something his love-drunk heart had refused to see. Every Sunday, they occupied the front pew at St. Augustine's Catholic Church, Adaeza's voice rising above the congregation in hymns that seemed to make the angels themselves pause and listen. Her jollof rice had become legendary at every church function, women crowding around her with notebooks, begging for secrets she would share with the grace of a queen dispensing favors to her subjects. Pastor Ifeanyi Okafor himself had declared their marriage a union blessed by the Almighty, holding them up as an example of modern Christian success. But the wisest grandmother in his village once warned that the loudest prayers sometimes hide the darkest sins. Austin's colleagues at the bank saw him as the man who had everything: a corner office on the 20th floor, a house in Victoria Island, a wife who could make senators' wives feel inadequate at state functions. During lunch meetings at the prestigious Lagos Country Club, successful men would lean in close, asking for his secret to domestic bliss, while their own marriages crumbled like old mortar in rainy season. He would laugh and credit good fortune, never mentioning the growing silence at his dinner table, or the way Adaeza's smile seemed to freeze when she thought he wasn't watching. Success had made him blind to the cracks spreading through his perfect facade. The compound security guards always greeted Adaeze with deep bows and respectful, "Good morning, madam," their voices carrying the reverence reserved for the truly powerful. She would glide past them like royalty, her expensive perfume trailing behind her like invisible chains of authority, her designer handbags swinging with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth. Neighbors' children would scatter when she approached, not from rudeness, but from an instinctive fear they couldn't name. The same way small animals sense predators long before they strike. Yet Austin interpreted their behavior as awe, another confirmation that he had chosen well in the marriage market. Behind the gates of their modern compound, life seemed to flow like honey from a blessed hive. Breakfast served at precisely 7, Austin's shirts pressed to military standards, dinner conversations filled with Adaeze's melodious laughter as she recounted her day's activities with the wives of other successful men. She spoke of charity work and women's fellowship meetings with such passion that Austin often found himself staring at her in wonder, marveling at how the Almighty had gifted him with such a compassionate partner. The house staff moved around her with quiet efficiency, their faces carefully neutral, their eyes never meeting hers for longer than necessary. But in the photographs scattered throughout their living room, family gatherings, wedding anniversaries, Christmas celebrations, one face appeared less and less frequently with each passing year. Nneka Okoro, Austin's 70-year-old mother, the woman who had sold her precious coral beads to pay his university fees. In the earlier photos, she stood close to the happy couple, her weathered hands resting proudly on her son's shoulders, her eyes bright with the joy of a mother whose sacrifices had borne fruit. Yet with each subsequent image, she seemed to fade toward the edges, her smile growing smaller, her presence becoming ghost-like. What Austin couldn't see was the story those photographs were really telling. The slow, systematic erasure of the woman who had given him life. Nneka Okoro's arthritic fingers trembled as she peeled the yam tubers in the kitchen corner, where Adayeze had banished her like a common house help. The very woman who had once ruled this kitchen before her son's marriage had stripped her of authority. The morning sun streaming through the window illuminated the deep lines etched into her face, each wrinkle a testament to years of sacrifice, sleepless nights spent praying for Austin's success, and countless meals skipped so her son could eat his fill. She hummed old Igbo lullabies under her breath, the same melodies that had once soothed Austin through childhood fevers and nightmares. But now the songs felt like whispered prayers for strength to endure another day in what had once been her sanctuary. The knife in her hands moved with practiced precision, but her eyes held the dull ache of a woman who had become a stranger in her own son's house. Adayeze's Louboutin heels announced her approach like war drums across the terrazzo floors, each click a declaration of territory and power that made the house staff scatter like leaves before a storm. She swept into the kitchen with the authority of a general inspecting conquered lands, her perfectly applied makeup and designer kaftan creating a stark contrast against Nneka Okoro's simple wrapper and aging face. "The yam is taking too long," Adayeze declared, her voice honeyed but carrying the underlying thread of a cobra preparing to strike. Her eyes surveyed the kitchen with the cold calculation of someone who had already decided the outcome of this encounter, her manicured fingers drumming against the marble countertop like a countdown to execution. The vegetables Nneka Okoro had carefully selected at the market that morning, the ripest tomatoes, the freshest peppers, the premium stockfish she had haggled for with her small pension money, sat neglected on the counter while Adayeze's attention focused on finding fault. "This pepper smells stale," she lied smoothly, lifting a perfectly fresh Scotch bonnet to her nose with theatrical disgust, knowing full well that Nneka Okoro had purchased it just hours earlier. The old woman's shoulders sagged slightly, but she remained silent, having learned through countless similar encounters that defending herself would only escalate Adayeze's manufactured outrage. The kitchen staff watched from the corners of their eyes, witnesses to a slow-motion assassination disguised as domestic management. Austin's favorite soup, the same ofansala his mother had perfected over decades. The recipe passed down through generations of Okoro women like a sacred inheritance, now sat cold and untouched in the refrigerator, deliberately ruined by Adayeze's accidental addition of too much salt. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mama." Adayeze would coo with mock concern whenever her sabotage was discovered, her voice dripping with false sympathy, while her eyes sparkled with malicious satisfaction. These were not accidents, but calculated strikes in a war Nneka Okoro had never agreed to fight. Each ruined meal another victory in Adayeze's campaign to erase the old woman's presence from her son's life. The waste of precious ingredients, food that could have fed a family for days, seemed to bring Adayeze particular joy. Phone calls from Austin's extended family, aunts wanting to check on Nneka Okoro's health, cousins hoping to arrange visits, church members inviting her to prayer meetings, mysteriously never reached their intended recipient. Adayeze would answer with practiced sweetness, promising to relay messages that would evaporate like morning mist the moment she hung up the phone. "Mama is sleeping," became her standard lie, delivered with such convincing concern that callers often praised Austin for having such a caring daughter-in-law. Meanwhile, Nneka Okoro sat by the window, wondering why her sister hadn't called in weeks, why the prayer group seemed to have forgotten her existence, why the world outside these walls had grown so silent. The transformation was subtle but devastating. Fresh towels were no longer placed in Nneka Okoro's bathroom. Her favorite chair was moved to face away from the television. Her medications were, accidentally, forgotten during shopping trips, forcing embarrassing emergency runs to the pharmacy when Austin noticed. Adayeze orchestrated these small cruelties with the precision of a master conductor, each slight calculated to cause maximum psychological damage while maintaining plausible deniability. The old woman's dignity was being stripped away thread by thread, like a wrapper slowly unraveling until nothing remained but naked shame and isolation. During the rare moments when Austin was present, Adayeze would transform into the perfect daughter-in-law, serving Nneka Okoro's food first, speaking with exaggerated respect, even offering to massage the old woman's aching joints while shooting triumphant glances toward her confused mother-in-law. These performances were masterpieces of manipulation, leaving Nneka Okoro questioning her own sanity and wondering if the cruelties she experienced in private were real or imagined. Austin would beam with pride at his wife's apparent devotion, completely blind to the psychological warfare being conducted right under his nose while he counted his blessings and thanked God for his perfect family. Austin's phone buzzed against the polished conference table at the Transcorp Hilton in Abuja, the screen lighting up with a message that would change everything. Meeting concluded early, client satisfied, deal closed with handshakes and champagne toasts that tasted of victory and unexpected freedom. Around him, fellow executives packed their leather briefcases with the slow movements of men reluctant to return to Lagos's traffic and office politics. But Austin's heart raced with different plans entirely. 3 days away from his family had felt like an eternity, and now the universe had gifted him with precious extra time to surprise the woman who made his house a home. The irony would later cut him deeper than any machete blade. His eagerness to return to love had led him straight into the jaws of betrayal. The Abuja market sprawled before him like a vibrant tapestry of sounds, smells, and colors that transported him back to childhood adventures with Nneka Okoro, when she would hold his small hand tight while navigating the maze of vendors selling everything from fresh plantains to spiritual charms. Northern ground nuts, his mother's absolute favorite, caught his eye first. Their shells perfectly formed and promising the creamy sweetness that would light up her weathered face with pure joy. The vendor, a woman with kind eyes, smiled as Austin selected the best batch, her blessing following him like protective incense. May your mother live to see her great-grandchildren dance at her feet. His Mercedes SUV cut through the Lagos evening traffic with the urgency of a man carrying precious cargo, the dashboard clock showing 7:47 p.m. Earlier than any previous return from his business trips, early enough to catch Adayeze preparing dinner, and maybe convince her to let Nneka Okoro share in cooking his favorite meal. The bag of fresh ingredients sat in the passenger seat like wedding gifts. Premium stockfish from the northern rivers, aromatic curry leaves, the kind of palm oil that would make even ordinary rice taste like a feast fit for kings. His phone remained deliberately silent. No calls to announce his arrival. No text messages to spoil the surprise that had him grinning like a schoolboy, planning his first romantic gesture. Streetlights began flickering on across Victoria Island as Austin navigated the familiar roads leading home, each turn bringing him closer to the sanctuary where his two favorite women would soon fuss over him like he was still the small boy who used to hide behind his mother's wrapper when strangers visited. The security guard's expression seemed strangely startled when Austin pulled through the compound gates, but exhaustion made the man's nervous wave appear normal, just another long day in Lagos coming to its natural end. Music drifted from the house windows, Adaeze's favorite gospel songs providing soundtrack to what Austin imagined would be a peaceful domestic scene of dinner preparation and evening prayers. The front door stood slightly ajar, which struck Austin as odd, given Adaeze's obsession with security and her constant lectures about keeping the house properly sealed against the city's dangers that lurked in every shadow. Laughter echoed from somewhere inside. Not the melodious sound of his wife's public persona, but something harder, sharper, more primal than anything he had ever heard escape her perfectly lipsticked mouth. The bag of ground nuts suddenly felt heavy in his hands, and an inexplicable chill ran down his spine despite the evening's humid warmth. Something was wrong, but his love-clouded mind couldn't process what his instincts were screaming. Keys jingled softly as Austin stepped across the threshold into his own home, the familiar marble floors now feeling foreign beneath his Italian leather shoes, the expensive artwork on the walls seeming to watch him with newfound judgment. The sounds from the living room grew clearer, not laughter at all, but something far more disturbing, punctuated by what sounded like impacts, like meat being tenderized for cooking, like violence disguised as domestic activity. His briefcase slipped from numb fingers and hit the floor with a thud that should have announced his presence to anyone listening. But the sounds continued without pause, drawing him forward like a moth toward a flame that would surely consume everything he thought he knew about his perfect life. The corridor leading to the living room stretched before him like a pathway to revelation, each step carrying him closer to a truth that would shatter his world into pieces too sharp to ever reassemble. Austin's heart hammered against his ribs with the desperate rhythm of a caged bird sensing the approach of a predator, while his mind still clung to innocent explanations. Perhaps Adaeze was rearranging furniture. Maybe she was tenderizing meat for tomorrow's stew. Surely there was a logical reason for the sounds that made his blood run cold. Austin's world collapsed into a single, impossible frame as he stepped into his living room and witnessed a scene that would replay in his nightmares for the rest of his days. His wife, the woman who sang hymns at Sunday service, standing over his unconscious mother with a machete raised high like a ritual blade in the hands of an ancient priestess drunk on blood and power. Time fractured into crystalline moments, the weapon gleaming under the ceiling fan's light. Adaeze's designer caftan splattered with crimson evidence of her true nature. Nneka Okoro's motionless form crumpled on the terrazzo floor like a discarded prayer cloth. The scream building in Austin's throat died before birth, strangled by shock so complete that his body forgot how to function, how to breathe, how to process the impossible transformation of love into horror. Blood pooled around Nneka Okoro's gray head like a halo of accusations, each drop crying out against the woman Austin had trusted with his heart, his future, his family's sacred honor. The basket of vegetables his mother had brought for dinner, plantains and yams, she had selected with the careful hands of a woman who still believed she had value in this house, lay scattered like omens across the floor, their fresh green promise now contaminated by violence that defied every natural law Austin had ever learned. Her wrapper, the same blue and gold pattern she had worn to his graduation ceremony years ago, was torn and stained with evidence of brutality that made his soul recoil from accepting what his eyes reported with merciless clarity. Adaeze's face turned toward the machete with an expression of pure ecstasy, more features Austin had never seen before, cheekbones sharp as blade edges, eyes bright with the fever of someone intoxicated by power over life and death, lips curved in a smile that belonged to something that had never been human at all. This was not anger, not even hatred. This was the face of a predator finally free to feed, a mask slipping away to reveal the monster that had been sharing his bed, his meals, his prayers for 5 long years. The beautiful woman he had married had vanished completely, replaced by a creature whose very existence mocked every belief he had ever held about love, trust, and the possibility of truly knowing another human being. The machete. Austin recognized it as the one they used for cutting stubborn yam stems in the compound garden, hung suspended in the air like the sword of divine judgment, its blade reflecting not just the room's light, but years of calculated deception, methodical cruelty, and patience that had finally reached its intended climax. Arias's grip was steady, professional, as if she had practiced this moment in private rehearsals, planning each detail with the same meticulous care she brought to organizing church functions and charity fundraisers. The weapon was not a tool of passion, but an instrument of execution, held by hands that had served Austin breakfast just 3 mornings ago while whispering sweet endearments into his ear. His mother's breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps that sounded like forgiveness being forced from lungs filled with the bitter knowledge of betrayal. Not just Adiazi's betrayal, but Austin's unconscious complicity in allowing this monster to claim dominion over the woman who had given him life. Neka Okoro's eyes, barely open and clouded with pain, seemed to find Austin's face across the room, and in their depths he saw not accusation, but a final, heartbreaking expression of love for the son who had chosen beauty over wisdom, modern romance over ancient bonds. Her lips moved soundlessly, perhaps forming his name, perhaps offering the forgiveness he would never deserve. The groundnuts Austin had brought as gifts of love lay scattered around his feet like broken promises, their shells cracked and content spilled across the marble floor, where his mother's blood was slowly spreading in an inexorable tide of truth. The irony cut deeper than any physical wound. He had rushed home early to surprise his family with treats, to create a perfect evening of togetherness and joy, only to discover that perfection was a lie, and togetherness was a mask worn by a monster who had been systematically destroying everything he held sacred. The man who thought he had everything suddenly realized he had understood nothing at all. Adiaza's head began to turn toward the doorway, where Austin stood frozen, her movement slow and predatory, like a snake sensing new prey entering her domain. The smile spreading across her blood-flecked face promised that she felt no shame, no surprise, no fear at being discovered in her true form. Only the satisfaction of a player finally ready to reveal her winning hand in a game Austin had never realized he was playing. As their eyes met across the destroyed living room, across his mother's broken body, across the wreckage of everything he had believed about his life, Austin understood with terrible clarity that this was not the end of Adiaza's plan. This was only the beginning of a horror that would consume everything he had ever loved. Adiaza's laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep and primal, the sound like crystal breaking in reverse, each note more beautiful and terrible than the last, creating music that belonged in nightmares, rather than the living room where Austin had once felt safe enough to dream about their future children playing on these same blood-stained floors. She lowered the machete slowly, almost ceremonially, her movements flowing with the grace of someone who had finally shed a costume that had been suffocating her true nature for far too long. The woman Austin had married was dissolving before his eyes, revealing something underneath that had been watching him, studying him, planning this moment while sharing his bed and accepting his love like sacrificial offerings to feed her patient hunger. "Austin, my dear husband," she purred, her voice carrying the same melodious quality that had first enchanted him at their church's Easter service 5 years ago. But now each syllable dripped with mockery that made his skin crawl with the realization that every sweet word she had ever spoken had been a lie designed to lure him deeper into her web. "You're home early from Abuja. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." Her tone suggested mild inconvenience rather than the shock of being caught attempting murder, as if she were commenting on unexpected rain during a picnic, rather than standing over his mother's broken body with a weapon in her hands. The casual nature of her greeting was perhaps more terrifying than the violence itself. This was not the behavior of someone who had snapped under pressure, but someone revealing their true nature after years of perfect performance. She stepped over Nneka Okoro's still form with the delicate precision of a dancer navigating the stage, her expensive sandals leaving bloody footprints across the marble that Austin had paid for with overtime wages and promotional bonuses he had earned to build their dream home. "Look at me, Austin," she commanded with the authority of someone who had always held all the power in their relationship, who had been managing and manipulating him like a chess piece while he believed himself to be her equal partner in marriage. Her eyes, those same dark orbs that had made him forget his own name during their courtship, now blazed with intelligence so cold and calculating that he finally understood why his mother had always seemed nervous in Adaeze's presence. Some part of Nneka Okoro's ancient wisdom had recognized the predator even when Austin's educated mind had been blind to the danger. "Do you want to know the truth, Austin?" Adaeze asked, tilting her head with a curious expression of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. Her question rhetorical, because they both knew he was too paralyzed by shock to respond, too overwhelmed by the collapse of everything he thought he knew about reality, to do anything but stand there, like a statue witnessing the end of the world. "The truth is that your mother was never going to leave this house alive. Tonight was always going to be the night she joined the ancestors. I just planned for you to have an alibi in Abuja when her body was discovered." The clinical detachment in her voice as she discussed premeditated murder made Austin's blood freeze in his veins, each word hitting him like physical blows that left him reeling. She began walking toward him with the confident stride of a predator approaching cornered prey, the machete swinging casually at her side like a fashion accessory, her blood-splattered caftan creating a horrific contrast against her perfectly applied makeup and expensive jewelry that suddenly looked like trophies taken from previous victims. "Your mother was a burden, Austin. An old goat that needed to be removed from our path to real happiness. She filled your head with those ridiculous traditional ideas about respecting elders, about family obligations, about putting anyone's needs before your wife's desires. Each word was chosen to wound, to strip away not just his illusions about their marriage, but his fundamental beliefs about family, duty, and the sacred bonds that had shaped his identity since childhood. I've been planning this for 2 years, she continued, her confession delivered with the pride of an artist, explaining their masterpiece to an appreciative audience, completely unaware or unconcerned that her audience was dying inside with each revelation. Every cold meal, every forgotten message, every small cruelty was designed to wear her down, to isolate her, to make her death seem like a mercy rather than a crime. I studied her routines, her weaknesses, her fears. I learned exactly how much psychological pressure an old woman could endure before she would either die naturally from stress or give me the excuse I needed to finish the job myself. The methodical nature of her torture campaign hit Austin like a series of revelations, each one forcing him to re-examine years of domestic life through new, horrifying eyes. Austin's legs finally gave way beneath him as the full scope of a deception crashed over him like a tsunami of truth too massive to comprehend. He collapsed to his knees among the scattered groundnuts and his mother's spreading blood, his briefcase and its contents of business success suddenly meaningless in the face of domestic apocalypse. Above him, Adaeze smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose patience had finally been rewarded, whose long game was reaching its intended conclusion. "Now, my dear husband," she said, raising the machete once more, "you have a choice to make. You can join your precious mother in death, or you can help me create a story that will make me a wealthy widow rather than a convicted murderer." Either way, the weak, sentimental Austin, who put his mother's needs above his wife's happiness, dies tonight. Time suspended itself like dust motes in cathedral light, as Austin knelt among the scattered groundnuts and his mother's blood. His world reduced to this single moment, where every decision would echo through eternity like thunder rolling across ancestral lands. Adayeze stood above him with the patience of a predator who had cornered her prey, the machete gleaming in her steady grip while her blood splattered. Captain transformed her into something that belonged in nightmares rather than the living room where they had shared communion bread just last Sunday. The choice she offered was no choice at all. A devil's bargain wrapped in matrimonial language that made mockery of every vow he had ever spoken before God and witnesses. His mother's labored breathing filled the silence, with accusations more powerful than any spoken word. Each struggling gasp, a reminder of the woman who had sold her precious coral beads to pay his university fees, who had fasted for 3 days when he fell sick with malaria, who had prayed rosaries until her knees bled for his success in life and love. Nneka Okoro's eyes, clouded with pain but still holding fierce intelligence, found his face across the blood-stained marble and spoke the language only mothers and sons understand. Not blame, but infinite love mixed with a terrible knowledge that her boy had finally seen the monster he had married. The dowry he had paid to Adayeze's family suddenly felt like 30 pieces of silver, payment for betraying the very foundation of his existence. "Choose now, Austin," Adayeze repeated, her voice carrying the false sweetness of poisoned honey, each word designed to sound reasonable while demanding the unreasonable. That he become accomplice to attempted murder. That he choose romantic passion over the sacred bonds that had shaped his soul since his first heartbeat. She spoke of their future together as if his mother's near death was merely an inconvenience to be managed, like a canceled business meeting or unexpected traffic delay. Her complete lack of remorse revealed depths of evil that made Austin's stomach revolt against the intimacies they had shared, the prayers they had spoken together, the dreams they had built on foundations of lies and calculated cruelty. The marriage certificate hanging on their bedroom wall might as well have been written in disappearing ink, meaningless against the blood covenant between mother and child that had been signed in birth pangs and sealed with sacrificial love that asked nothing in return but honor and protection.